The following program is brought to you by Naleo TV, the people's platform.
Aloha, and welcome to another episode of Classic Car Chronicles, the story behind the rides. Today, we have a 1956 Studebaker Golden Hawk with its owner, Randy Bohannon. Welcome, Randy.
Hi there, glad to be here.
So Studebaker, not a car I think a lot of people in Hawaii know or recognize the name. Can you tell us a little bit about the Studebaker Company?
Studebaker Company is a really interesting company. The company started making wagons back in the 1850s, and the wagons, the Conestoga wagons that went out to the gold rush, were made by Studebaker.
Wow.
In fact, they started in California. They had to ship them to St. Louis and then drive them back, so they moved to the Midwest. If you go back through the late 1800s, you find Studebaker wagons everywhere. When Lincoln, Mary and Abe Lincoln went to Ford's Theater, they drove in a Studebaker wagon. When they took the body back out of there, they drove a Studebaker hearse.
Wow.
And Studebaker's an interesting company. They first started making electric cars. 1903, they made electric cars for 10 years. The reason they made electric cars was the other cars, gas cars, you had to crank them to start, and women couldn't do that. So I figured if you got electric cars, women and men could drive them. Right. So they did that. And then they went through and they had lots of innovations through the years. They made a bunch of cars that went to the Indianapolis Raceway and raced. Their actual cars that you could buy. World War II, they were one of the bigger companies, even though they were an independent. And when everything shut down to make munitions, Studebaker made the engines for B-17 bombers. They made 68,000 engines for the B-17 bombers. Most people are not aware of that. And then after the war, they started out, they had in 47, they had a car, completely new design, not unlike anything else, and they called it first after the war car. And it was completely different, had instead of individual lights on away from the fenders, the lights were in the fenders and that kind of thing. And then when they got up into the 50s, they got into this muscle car race. And they started in 1955. 53, they'd come with that beautiful flat car. 55, they put a pretty good sized V8 engine in it because they'd come out with a V8 in 1951, overhead valve V8. Ford had 85 horsepower, Studebaker had 120. But anyway, then in 54, Studebaker and Packard united, and they decided they wanted to make a muscle car. So they took a lightweight two-door coupe, and they put a great big V8 in it. This is a Packard V8 engine in it.
Oh, wow.
That was 275 horsepower at the time, at a time when other cars were, 120, 150 maybe. But then the Packard engine in this came with a Packard transmission behind it, automatic. They did a test drive of Studebaker, Thunderbird, Corvette, and Chrysler 300. This car blew them all away. That was the regular car. Then they came out, as back then, when you bought accessories, the dealer put them in. So if you wanted power steering, dealer put them in. Well, they had a kit called the Jet Street kit that gave it a lot more horsepower, and it included 2 4 barrels instead of 1, solid lifters instead of hydraulic lifters, adjustable push rods, dual valve springs, had a special racing cam, had dual point ignition, and a hotter coil. And it gave it, instead of 275, at 330 horsepower. In 1956, that was absolutely unheard of. So anyway, and just so happened, I was in high school then when they came out. So the way I got interested. But anyway, that's kind of the story of, the rough thing. And of course, then in 63, they did the ultimate. They came out with a car called the Avanti, supercharged. And a lot of people don't realize it was the world's fastest car. And it was the world's fastest car for many years. Did 196 miles an hour in 1963.
So why do you think Studebaker wasn't as mainstream like Ford, Chrysler?
Well, you had the big three.
Big three, right?
And then you had Studebaker, Packard, Hudson, Rambler, and a bunch of those were independents. They couldn't afford the mass production scale. The big three started this conspiracy against the small independents. In fact, what they would do is if you'd ordered a car, they would look up your order, they'd call you and say, if you'll cancel that order, we'll give you a super good deal on a Ford or a Plymouth or a Chevy. So a lot of them canceled it. And they also did things like the Corvette body and the Avanti body were made by the same company. They said, if you keep making bodies for Studebaker, we're not going to buy any from you anymore. Told the steel companies, if you sell steel to those independents, we're not going to buy steel from you anymore. So
Wow.
But they can't do that anymore.
Well, you basically, I can tell just by your knowledge of the history of Studebaker, when did you start liking Studebakers? You mentioned something about being in high school.
Right. Well, my dad, we lived right near South Bend. I grew up in Illinois. And so there are a lot of Studebakers in the Midwest. And they were a very popular car, and they were really fast. Most of them were very fast. And they're very reliable. And very, very reliable.
Mm-hmm.
And so my dad always bought them. And so when I was in high school, I was dating a gal who later became my wife. Her family was much more fortunate than mine. Her dad bought one of her brothers one of these brand new in 1956.
Oh, okay.
And I happened to see that, and I got a chance to drive it. And it was beyond anything. I used to tease all the other people. I'd go and put them in front and say, take a look at the front of this. And after 3 or 4 times, they say, what you're doing? What are you doing? I said, I wanted you to see what the front end of a Studebaker looks like.
Because you're only going to see the taillights when we race.
Interested in that. And then, of course, when they went on into the supercharged cars, stuff like that, I was really interested. And so that's what got me going. But I've had Studebakers. My first Studebaker was a 1950 Champion. I paid $127, and that was too much.
So how many Studebakers do you have?
Right now, I have 9. 8 of them are drivable. 1 is a parts car.
Oh, okay.
So I'm some kind of a strange duck.
Okay, so you mentioned parts. How hard is it to get parts for a Studebaker?
Well, surprisingly easy. Surprisingly easy. And there are about 3 different reasons for that. First one was Studebaker parts are interchangeable from going way back from the 30s through the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
You could use Studebaker parts interchangeable. Another thing is when they decided how many parts to make they figure out how many cars they're going to make, how many parts they needed to service that car. And they did one run and they made all those parts and sent them out. So all the dealers were stocked with parts. A lot of those parts are still there. They're brand new in the box. Today, if many of you notice, you go in and you've got a problem with your car, they'll say, well, we're going to order the part.
Right.
And if you're living in Hawaii, good luck.
So the Studebakers were reliable cars.
Very reliable car. When the first V8 came out in 1951, they had forged crankshaft, forged rods, forged pistons, solid lifters, and a gear-driven camshaft. That was their very first V8. And, they very reliable.
So they actually had different parts from, like Ford. Ford had developed parts for it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, so readily available even today.
Even today.
Wow.
And a lot of them, back then, a lot of parts like suspension parts and that are, well, for example, the transmission. Studebaker used that transmission. Chevy used that transmission. Pontiac used the transmission. Hudson used the transmission. Lots of different companies. They were Borg Warner transmissions.
Okay.
So, they're easy to, and then they made them. They had a 3-speed and a 4-speed that used the same case and a lot of the same internal gears. So it's a lot of things like that that are interesting.
So out of all of your Studebakers, I know that the Golden Hawk is one of your favorites, but tell me what attracted you to it.
The way it drives. It's absolutely a delight to drive, and it goes. I mean, it really, really goes with that 330 horse, and it goes not like a lot of small block cars that don't have any power down low. You got to get them going really fast. Right. Like I drove up here, I went between 12 and 1500 RPMs all the way down to get here at third gear overdrive. So it's basically a 4-speed. But I like the torque and I like the power, and they really drive well. And they got all kinds of room inside.
So maintenance on this car, I know you do the maintenance, right?
Yeah.
How do you find it hard? It's like any other car, right?
Yeah, you change the oil and filter, and then the only other thing is you got to lubricate the chassis. Other than that, there's not that much to do.
Well, it is a very pretty car. The color combination is unique. You don't see many cars like this with this kind of two-tone paint on it.
It's called doe skin and mocha. And if you get it out in the sunlight, this looks like white here. But out in the sunlight, you'll see a kind of a beige hue. And I've never seen any other cars this color.
Well, we're going to have to get it out in the sunlight and go take a ride. But thank you so much for taking the time out to come visit us. And again, I know I see you almost every week.
Right.
And us car guys stick together. But this is just, again, a very unique car, very beautiful car, and in really like pristine condition. So if you ever see it on the road, stay away from it. don't get close. But anyway,
if you get a chance, you got to get up and look under the hood, because it is when you think back of those
we'll
cars
take a look at that too.
Yeah.
But thank you, Randy.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
The 1956 Studebaker Golden Hawk stands as one of the most iconic American cars of the mid-20th century. Combining elegant design with impressive performance, the Golden Hawk showcased Studebaker's commitment to innovation and boldness in an increasingly competitive auto market. Under the hood, the 1956 Golden Hawk packed a punch. It came equipped with a Packard 352 cubic inch V8 engine producing 275 horsepower, making it one of the most powerful American cars of its time. Weighing in at just over 3,400 pounds, the Golden Hawk delivered exceptional speed and acceleration for a 1950s vehicle. Its lightweight body, combined with the powerful V8, made it a competitor to many performance cars of the era. Today, the Golden Hawk remains a sought-after treasure for enthusiasts, standing as a testament to Studebaker's golden era of engineering and design.
Well, there you have it. A 1956 Studebaker Golden Hawk. What a ride. And conclusion to another Classic Car Chronicles story behind the rides. Aloha.